Franchise expansion has been an explicit aim of Nintendo for a long time, and in the recent decade we have seen many franchises grow in size considerably. Whether it's Mario going from a beloved corporate mascot to the face of the films and theme park rides, or Famicom Detective Club being plucked from absolute obscurity to becoming ensconced, as it would seem, a mainstay of Nintendo's game lineup for the foreseeable future, we can see a lot of evidence of how Nintendo approaches growing its franchises. But what is Nintendo's approach to franchise expansion? When assessing franchises for potential, what do they see? How do they approach it? How can we classify the different franchises meaningfully depending on how big they are and what they need to do to reach that next level? Which franchises could we see pushed to the next level? And when? And how? And why? In this video, I want to do a deep dive into how Nintendo is managing its large portfolio of intellectual property, so like, subscribe and settle in for another Nintendo Forecast deep dive. It is in many respects their biggest single corporate priority. Nintendo started out by manufacturing Hanafuda cards, diversified heavily in the mid-20th century under the leadership of its third president, Hiroshi Yamauchi, until it finally found a groove of toy manufacture in the 70s and finally electronic entertainment in the 80s. And yet increasingly the company has come to be referred to as an IP company. But while games were relatively quick to develop for older hardware, modern games posed a trickier dilemma, and so the Switch entered the picture, merging their handheld and home console line into a single product line, the Switch family of systems. On the one hand, doing so allowed them to produce bigger and better games. I've covered separately how the 2D Zelda team essentially folded into the 3D team before Breath of the Wild came out. However, with the success of the Switch, they have been able to expand their development efforts, and they are continuing to expand with new office space and a raft of new partners being welcomed to the Nintendo fold. Series like Tomodachi Life, Rhythm Heaven, Another Code, and Advance Wars have all returned in recent years after a period being out in the cold, as Nintendo progressively adapts more and more of its legacy game franchises to the Nintendo Switch. Meanwhile, franchise expansion has become an ever more crucial part of their future plans. We see this most notably with Mario, who has in the last decade headlined multiple apps, a film, several theme park areas, numerous Lego sets, plus dozens of games across a whole raft of series. Mario has always been big, but he's bigger now than ever before. We also see this with Zelda, which for the last decade or so has pretty much kept to the apparent aspiration of a game a year. Granted, they skipped 2022, but then again they also had two Zelda titles in 2019 with Link's Awakening and Crypt of the Necrodancer, Cadence of Hyrule. And it's not just the bigger franchises that are growing, of course. From Metroid to Famicom Detective Club, from Pikmin to Advance Wars, it has been a golden period for a whole panoply of Nintendo's properties. I think the first thing we need, therefore, is a classification system, a way to identify which franchises are at what level and to see the common factors that help boost franchises from one level to the next, or indeed that cause them to crash out. Note, this is not a tier list of franchises, just giving my ready reckon of where franchises sit. I've done other videos like this, but I'm trying to give a classification system that anyone can utilize, a set of requirements that allow us to group like franchises together depending on their size, and therefore chart their progress from Mole Mania style subterranean obscurity to Mario-esque galactic wonder. I should also clarify that when I'm discussing these IPs and franchises, of course there are multiple meanings to these words. Mario Party is one franchise of games, but belongs to the higher level Mario IP. So Mario Party itself might be on a lower level compared to others, but one of the elements we'll look for in the higher level intellectual properties is the ability to contain within them multiple game series. As we go along, I'll look in more depth at the characteristics of games at each level and what stops them from moving to the next level, but essentially, my level system is this. Level 1. These franchises are basically inactive, and there is nobody at Nintendo who is likely to activate them. The reasons for this we'll get into. Examples would be Mysterious Murasame Castle and StarTropics. Level 2. These franchises have people at Nintendo who are interested in them, and a few have been fairly significant for the company in the past, but for various reasons, there is no fixed development group, although there may be individuals who have an interest. Star Fox is probably the poster child for this category, but Advance Wars probably also qualifies, at least at the moment. Level 3. These are franchises which have a permanent development foothold at Nintendo, whether an internal team or a senior producer or figure working with external groupings. Examples would include Famicom Detective Club working with Mages, Top-Down Zelda working with Grezzo, and Mario Party with Nintendo Cube. Level 4. These franchises are capable of sustaining multiple projects at once, whether through multiple games or extensive DLC, and are utilized increasingly for merchandise, with their characters largely becoming synonymous with Nintendo. Zelda, Fire Emblem, and Animal Crossing would all be in this bracket. Level 5. These are highly diversified mega brands with games, toys, audio-visual content, more merchandise than you can even imagine. And if the characters appeared on a screen in the middle of most major world cities, people would at least recognize them and link them to Nintendo. The biggest example of this would probably be Pokémon. I'm sure as I go through these, eyebrows may raise and may already be spiking skywards as I discuss specific examples, and the point is less that my specific examples are beyond challenge or discussion. In any event, since we don't know what Nintendo are cooking up now, it's only really possible to identify in retrospect where these franchises are in terms of leveling with any kind of reliability. But what I want to achieve is that the broad framework of levels can be used to discuss what is the most important part from Nintendo's point of view. How do you get franchises from one level to the next? Why do franchises backslide, and which examples have worked successfully in the past and which have failed over the recent period? So, let's start with level 1. There are a great many IPs at Nintendo which have had maybe one or two games and which now stand long forgotten. Some are incredibly niche, such as Mole Mania and Dush and the Giant. Others have a certain fan cachet, such as StarTropics and Mysterious Murasame Castle, but there are others besides. One that concerns me currently is Wario Land, where there is still a figure, Takehiko Hosokawa, still working at Nintendo, who does have a deep affinity with the Wario Land series, having directed or being quite senior on most of the classic Wario Land titles. This would exclude Wario Land from level 1 classification at the time being because there is still an interested party in the building. But of course, the longer it is between Wario releases, the more likely Wario Land is to sink into the abyss of level 1. Another game series that I think can now be classified at level 1 is Golden Sun, with no evidence of anybody currently at Nintendo showing any interest in the franchise, and even the key developers at Camelot now near or at or past retirement age. In both of these cases, I have other videos which offer more specific deep dives, so let's move on for now. Now look, if this were a different company, Nintendo might just hire some hotshot young team and get the franchises rebooted. Particularly with something like Mysterious Murasame Castle, there have been lots of tributes over the years, with games like Nintendo Land, and Goichi Suda of No More Heroes fame expressed an interest in a revival several years ago. This can work to tremendous effect. I am one of those crotchety shaking fists at the sky Sonic fans who believe that the series peaked in 1994, and while 1999 Sonic Adventure pretty much held it together, the franchise has been a shadow of its former self ever since. But the one shining exception to this tale of garishly blue woe is Sonic Mania, which was of course developed not by the core Sonic team, but by a group of obsessive fans led by Christian Whitehead. The thing is, this kind of successful reinvention is relatively rare in its own right, but especially for Nintendo, I can't think of any previous example where Nintendo have brought back a franchise without any reference at all to the people who helped develop at least one of the previous entries. Perhaps Kid Icarus Uprising, but even then, it is arguably a reinvention rather than a reprisal of what went before. And I think this makes sense from the perspective of Nintendo's development philosophy. I know that games are a commodity, and obviously these titles are developed for a commercial market. Explicitly so. But despite this, Nintendo's approach is very much about craftsmanship, about artistry. Recall Miyamoto extolling to Reggie Fils-Aimé that his marketing plan to bundle Wii Sports with the Wii undervalued the games and misunderstood the degree of sheer effort it takes for the developers to create a truly amazing game experience. This is a company where even the key people working on Mario have spent years pondering what actually makes a Mario game, and they believe that this cannot be written down in a manual but only passed on through a gradual teaching process. Remember, Nintendo are to their fingertips a Kyoto company, and Kyoto as a city built around the artisan. Its history is of craft. I don't think Nintendo are very interested in having new teams trying to retro engineer an old game series from the outside. After all, if you have to approach the game from the outside, then you may as well just create something original because you clearly don't understand the core concept of it. They want people who understand the game deeply from the inside to then, essentially, train others in the way of making that game. We have seen this with Kaori Miyachi taking joint ownership of the responsibility for Famicom Detective Club and pretty much being name-checked by Sakamoto as the heir apparent to the series, as well as with Tomomi Sano stepping into the 2D Zelda chair. What is striking to me about both these people is that they started more from a producerial angle than a creative angle. They are forging relationships with new developers, but they're doing so having worked closely with Sakamoto and Aonuma to imbibe the core values that make these respective franchises work. Without anybody to model this craftsman process, I wonder whether there is any likelihood that many of these franchises would ever be chosen for a return. So how does a franchise get boosted out of level 1? The answer, I'm sorry to say, is that it almost certainly doesn't, because as far as I can tell, the only way out is for it to be revealed that it was never truly in level 1 to start with. Famicom Detective Club is the perfect example. Mage is a development group of some considerable track record and reputation in the field of these kinds of games approached Nintendo. Nintendo kept them on the hook for a year. And yet what really made the difference was the fact that the writer of The Girl Who Stands Behind was still at Nintendo. Moreover, he was someone who had headed up his own corner of the EPD development sky, Yoshio Sakamoto. A bit of matchmaking ensured that Sakamoto and Mages, together with Kaori Miyachi, were able to forge a path for Famicom Detective Club, not just out of the level 1 franchises, but all the way up the chart to level 3. Surely, this franchise is a premier example of what can be done. But if Sakamoto wasn't there, I'm not sure Nintendo would have been so interested, or indeed interested at all. An enthusiastic outside pitch from a highly credible developer, such as Mages, clearly doesn't always move the dial. It did in the case of Another Code, but that's because Arc System Works had on staff several people who came from King who worked on the original title. But from Nintendo's point of view, they have so many franchises, and it really requires one of their passionate senior people to be able to drive a game forward. There are certain series where those people exist, but there are also series, StarTropics being another example I think, where I question who is left that really understands these games. This makes Level 1 a pretty punishing locale for a budding new IP. Having said that, Nintendo staff members tend to stick with the company for a long time. Shigeru Miyamoto may not be directly involved in game development much these days, but he has experience of almost everything that was developed during his time in the old EAD development group, and there are many other senior figures who have roots back to these days. This provides some sparks of hope, but just having someone familiar with the property is insufficient if, as with Yoshio Sakamoto, they are not motivated to do anything about it. Shinya Takahashi has spoken fondly of Wave Race before now, but whether in his more senior position he would be able to mentor a new Wave Race development team is more of an open question. On the flip side, there are games that are obscure but do have people with experience of the franchise still at the company, Snipperclips for example. And there are some, such as Dragalia Lost, where a good deal of expertise still resides in outside studios. It's also possible, unlikely but just about conceivable, that they could use the franchise but in a new form. Think about how Wario Land took an abrupt turn into WarioWare, or, of course, Kid Icarus Uprising, as I've already mentioned. The fact is, though, very few of these franchises have any element that is worth resurrecting for their own sakes, absent their original gameplay context. Clearly, the characters weren't iconic enough to cut through in a crowded marketplace, or they would have been developed further. I guess Mysterious Murasame Castle's Takamaru is the closest here, with various tributes, and of course, Ultra Hand tributes such as in Tears of the Kingdom have also appeared, referencing a previous Nintendo toy. But a tribute is not the same as a full game. There was a period in the mid 2010s where Nintendo took a rather different franchise expansion strategy and developed quite a lot of spin off titles which grafted the aesthetic of some of their other properties onto different gameplay mechanics. Hey Pikmin and Metroid Prime Federation Force were unsuccessful efforts, while Hyrule Warriors and Mario Maker have pretty much stuck around. Generally, though, Nintendo are confident in the core experiences of the titles they've developed and simply wish to find ways that these can be experienced, and in recent years their focus seems to have been on refreshing and reviving these core Heartland game experiences with all their quirks and strangeness that made them distinctive all along. Fundamentally, then, the final boss guarding the gates of level 1 is simply having someone at Nintendo, and almost always at EPD specifically, who has direct experience of the series in question. So, let's move on to level 2. These are franchises where there is a definite interest in their development within Nintendo, although interest alone is not enough. You also need a development group. There are some franchises which have been passed from pillar to post as they try to alight on a permanent development team to help deliver the vision of the core people. Star Fox never seemed to find a consistent group who could reliably return to the franchise again and again, while F-Zero hasn't fared an awful lot better. Metroid Dread was nearly 2 decades in the making. Donkey Kong Country struggled after Nintendo and Rare parted ways, and again, in the time since Retro, seemed to have left the Kongs in the cold. In fact, Donkey Kong is a good example of a case where the particular series of Donkey Kong Country is at level 2, whereas the overarching Donkey Kong franchise would clearly belong to a higher level. I don't think these level 2 franchises are necessarily ones that can't have new games now and then. Advance Wars is one recent example of a franchise that is clinging on to level 2 by the skin of its teeth. They clearly cared enough about it to put it back on its feet with Advance Wars 1 plus 2 Reboot Camp, but the low sales and slightly cursed launch of that title can't have helped matters. The creative partners way forward still exist, but director James Montana has recently made a different, non-Advance Wars title. I think there are enough people interested at Intelligent Systems, and Nintendo seem sympathetic to the franchise, meaning that it could return, and may well do so. It could even do so with Way Forward again, which might be a sign that it is up-leveling and could become a more regular going concern for Nintendo. But as it stands, I think we have to classify it at level 2. It's also worth saying that sometimes franchises this level actually do have regular teams, but those teams become busy with other projects. The Wii Punch-Out devs' Next Level Games were more integrated with Nintendo now than ever, but focused on Luigi's Mansion, Mario Strikers, and other projects. I don't know whether we'll get another Princess Peach Showtime game either, but clearly there is enough people with recent experience of developing the game at both Nintendo and good feel so that it could happen. But either way, interest doesn't translate into somebody working on the concept permanently. And this illustrates the difference with the franchises at level 3, which is the level that most successful Nintendo franchises over the years have existed at, often for decades. For a long time, 2D Mario, Pikmin and Mario Maker were all developed by the same group. Same with Animal Crossing and Splatoon. I deep dived both groups in the last year or so, and it's clear from recent credits that over time the teams have become larger and more diversified, more separate from each other, reflecting the increase in EPD's core development capacity. I am pretty confident that quite soon Splatoon and Animal Crossing teams will have very little overlap, allowing them to be developed concurrently. But even through the fallow periods, there have clearly been a core group tending to the pilot lights of these franchises. Even top-down Zelda, which, as I argue in a separate video currently on the Patreon, has a near complete personnel change, well, that series did have a handover to a new development group in the form of Grezzo, and you can see the relationship with Grezzo developing over the last 10 years, ever since Triforce Heroes. This has been a particular area of focus for Nintendo in recent years. Developing for an HD system is obviously a big step up, and gradually we have seen Nintendo progress to deeper and deeper cut revivals following a fairly predictable rhythm of blooding new development partners with a remake or remaster of an old title before, if they do a good job, setting them loose on something original. Where do these teams come from? In the case of Mercury Steam on Metroid and Mages on Famicom Detective Club, they pitched. In the case of Retro Studios on Donkey Kong Country and Metroid Prime, or Next Level Games with Luigi's Mansion, it seems like they were approached by key figures at Nintendo, quite often Miyamoto himself. And some of these groups have been with the franchise for so long that a change seems inconceivable. Think Intelligent Systems with WarioWare, Paper Mario and Fire Emblem. Even Mario Party and Nintendo Cube now fits the bill, it having been a good long while since Hudson Soft relinquished the franchise. It seems that the Switch Sports team was formed by reconvening the old Wii Sports group after some time away developing other things, and as Nintendo continues to expand, I expect opportunities to develop multiple niche franchises at once to only increase. This strikes me as promising for a series such as ARMS, which has clearly had a very strong set of developers supporting it, but was never quite a breakout franchise. In another time, Nintendo would need the team to double down on their bread and butter franchises, bringing Mario Kart to the market, but it's conceivable now that a smaller team could continue to pilot ARMS ideas alongside. It might not go into full development yet, and when it does, it might not be a core EPD team that actually makes it, but an outside group that takes day-to-day responsibility, or even a hybrid situation of the sort that we've seen in Pikmin 4, where EPD were heavily supplemented by developers from outside devs aiding. We can't be sure, of course, and yet again, we can only say for sure in retrospect, but I think it's highly likely that we can say that there is at least a semi-permanent ARMS team, even if it's just a handful of people working on a side project while they attend to Mario Kart as their day job. I would argue that level 3 is more or less the ceiling for any single game series, however successful, with one possible exception: Mario Kart, a single series that exists as a theme park ride, app, and sales sensation on a different stratosphere than almost anything else Nintendo has witnessed. In level 4, therefore, we reach IPs that have multiple production groups and not necessarily just in the space of gaming either. Pikmin would barely sustain itself at level 3 on its mainline game output, but over the years it has had shorts, comics, apps, and a whole lot of merchandising, as well as an increased cadence of game releases in the Switch era, thanks to the first 3 Pikmin titles being ready ports. It's definitely one of the weaker examples of a game at this level on raw game sales, but it just shows a good example of Nintendo's franchise policy. They have put a lot into Pikmin, and between merchandising, games, and apps, they clearly see it as something they want to push and that there is value in pushing. But on the other end, we have Zelda. Between open-air games, top-down games, remakes, Hyrule Warriors titles, and the occasional oddity like Cadence of Hyrule, the Zelda team have managed to sustain practically a game a year, on average at least, with 2 games in 2019 making up for the lack of a 2022 title. Zelda doesn't yet have the same breadth of merchandising and additional media potential, but you can see that it could be in the post, especially with the forthcoming movies. Animal Crossing also exists in this kind of space. We have the mainline Animal Crossing game, several spin-offs, but also amiibo cards, and in the past, even an animation. Currently, Animal Crossing is a very shaky one here, despite the absolutely stratospheric success of Animal Crossing New Horizon, because it has been so quiet of late. But I feel that Nintendo have a long-term aspiration to boost this into the big time that we will see over the coming years. And then there is Splatoon. With just 3 games to its name, it might seem like a slightly odd choice, but it has ongoing updates for long periods, DLC packs, which not only have the hype of new games, but also have been used to sell the expansion pack on Nintendo Switch Online in the case of Octo Expansion, plus the series is a cultural touchstone with Japanese youth especially. There's little doubt that Splatoon is one of Nintendo's major leading light franchises, appearing usually fourth after Mario, Zelda, and Animal Crossing in lineups of its key characters, such as on Nintendo Music and in the Nintendo Today app. So, what would it take for these storied franchises to reach level 5? Well, I think for this we need to look at a franchise that has often been on the level 4 to level 5 borderline, specifically Mario. In the 90s, Mario was huge, and not just in terms of video game output. We had a film, an American animation, all kinds of merch, and a succession of spin offs. But as the 90s Nintendo boom receded into memory, Mario remained iconic, but perhaps didn't always leverage his success as effectively. You could get plenty of Mario merch, and when the system sold well, games like New Super Mario Bros. Wii and Mario Kart for Wii were reliably huge sellers, but Mario was underutilized compared to the 90s and compared to what we see now, where he is the face of a theme park attraction, the lead in a Hollywood blockbuster series, and his merchandising arm grows almost exponentially every year. The fact is, though, the only franchise that has sustained this level of success for all those years is not actually Mario, but Pokémon. Pokémon instantly struck it big with an animated series, a card game, movies, and more, and has been very consistent over that time period. In fact, a lot of the impetus for the formation of the Pokémon Company appears to have been the recognition from Nintendo that they simply did not have the wherewithal in their own right to manage such a juggernaut franchise. It needed a bespoke company to manage it. I suspect if Pokemon had been developed in the 2020s, things might have been quite different, but for now, Pokemon is very much the shining example, and frankly, most of the success Mario has had in recent years borrows heavily from the Pokemon playbook. For Pokemon Day, see Mario Day. For the Detective Pikachu film, see the Super Mario Bros. Movie. For the Pokemon stores, see Super Nintendo World. And just as there are many iconic Pokemon, Mario's extended cast of characters is being pushed equally. Just as Pokemon is big enough to contain multitudes with major elements such as Pokemon Go and now the Pokemon Legends series, Mario has Mario Kart and Super Mario Bros., plus up and coming big hitters like Mario Party. Okay, so now we have a good idea of the levels. Let's look at where Nintendo's successes have been and which franchises have outsized potential to make a jump to a new level. Mario, I think, has been saved from being on the level 4 to level 5 border and is now very solidly in level 5 territory. The next franchise they clearly want to develop to this stage is Zelda, and the Zelda movie is a great opportunity to really bring that series to that new level. If they can keep to a game a year with the main series, and perhaps even slightly more than that with spin offs, apps, and tie ins, and if they expand their merchandising efforts, then Zelda does have a very good chance at breaking it really big. I'm not quite sure what scope there is for Super Nintendo World to expand to incorporate a Zelda section, and perhaps the world of Hyrule would benefit from a different, perhaps more rural, kind of location for a theme park style experience. But I expect in the next 10 years they will pay a lot of attention to how Zelda can move from being a solid level 4 franchise to being a third pillar in Nintendo's world domination strategy alongside Mario and Pokemon. It also strikes me that Animal Crossing won't be too far behind. It seems evident in retrospect that Nintendo was caught on the hop with the huge success of Animal Crossing New Horizons. A recent Kit and Krista guest suggested that the predictions were for sales a fraction of the amount that the game actually received, and of course the pandemic really had a critical impact in this respect. Animal Crossing has gone into an almost monk-like meditative silence in recent years. The only sign of life of late was the Animal Crossing Pocket Camp app being put up for sale, but this is as a result of original content on it being discontinued. But we know that Aya Kyogoku and her team have been expanding. We can see from the Splatoon 3 credits that the overlap with Animal Crossing New Horizons group was far less than with Splatoon 2, and clearly Animal Crossing has the potential to break out in a huge way, just like Mario, and just as Mario and Zelda have their own teams, so too, I would expect, Well, Animal Crossing. Now, Nintendo does not like to rush these things. Reportedly, Avi Arad was on the hook for a Zelda movie for many years, and Animal Crossing is perhaps even trickier to place in this context. It's also not necessarily the case that what works for one IP will work for others just the same. I'm not sure particularly that Animal Crossing screams Hollywood blockbuster, but maybe a cozy soap operatic television show, sure, I can see that. I don't think people might be rushing to Animal Crossing World theme parks either, but retail outlets with Able Sisters fashions and a cafe run by Franklin, well, that could really appeal. Nintendo may not crack the puzzle just yet, but you better believe they're working on it considerably, and actually, it's striking to me that there is the chance that they can pivot from a huge Mario push in late 2025 to early 2026, linked to Super Mario Bros. 40th and ahead of the Mario movie, to a Pokémon push during 2026 for that franchise's anniversary, and then to Zelda for late 2026 and early 2027 ahead of the Zelda movie, and notionally at least for the Zelda 40th, before then going into 2028 when the next Animal Crossing will very likely be due. If, and it is I grant you a very big if, but if they can dovetail a lot of additional IP activity for Animal Crossing alongside the new game, then perhaps they can avoid what must otherwise surely be an inevitable sense that the new game has underperformed compared to its Megaton predecessor. Animal Crossing already has its own strength, particularly with the amiibo cards. It doesn't just need to be games that are the source of profit for the series. Animal Crossing cooking apps or gardening social media series with an animated Isabelle giving advice. There must be many ways that they could push the series into the big time. If in 8 to 10 years' time Zelda and Animal Crossing can get anywhere near where Mario is now in terms of scale and importance, then I think Shantaro Furukawa will feel that Nintendo is on a far more secure footing going on from the Switch 2 when it eventually needs to. Of course, there are other franchises with the potential to break big, Splatoon being an obvious one. Still, Splatoon sales are more modest, it has merch, but it is less diversified, and it is still more of a regional phenomenon. I doubt that Splatoon will be ready for a while yet to move to level 5, but I can see it being consolidated at level 4 with good games and continual progression of merchandise. What else should we expect to see at level 4 then? Well, the list of iconic images Nintendo gives us in Nintendo Music gives us the big clues. Metroid and Pikmin have had their bumpiest of runs so far, but for these franchises, the key is going to be to continue putting out strong titles at a regular pace, while also maximizing their impact and capitalizing on the momentum that they have coming off of the Switch era. For Pikmin, the apps and other merchandise will be a big part of this, while in Metroid's case, its association with prestige technology, Metroid Dread and Metroid Prime 4 both accompanying console launches, seems to be the more critical part. Metroid in particular seems to have a huge potential for audio-visual expansion, films or television series, but I just don't know that the time for that is just yet. With Mercury Steam making regular Metroids and hopefully Retro continuing to work on Metroid Prime games into the future, they can keep Metroid as a high-profile title through the coming years, but I'm not sure it's yet ready for a bigger push beyond that. One outside shout to enter this level is Tomodachi or Miitopia. If, as I suspect, Grezzo are the regular developers of this franchise, it will have easily fulfilled the criteria for level 3, but the Miis have long been a successful element of Nintendo's innovative back catalogue, and if they continue to put out games in this oeuvre and can find a way to start merchandising them, then there is a lot of future potential. Print on demand allows much more personalization, and I could see a custom Mii set of avatars becoming a much bigger thing, especially on social media. Franchises at this level need to be broader than any one dev team, and Miitomo was already trialed in the app space. Just because something didn't work once doesn't necessarily preclude Nintendo from trying again, and so I can see there being an outside chance that, if the new Tomodachi is a hit, and it's followed by a Miitopia game and perhaps another Tomodachi, not quite so late into the Switch 2's life as Living a Dream will be in the Switches, well, I think the potential is there for it to grow into a pretty big deal for Nintendo. Another franchise worth a nod that might not be immediately obvious, but I really think could one day crack even level 5 franchise scale if handled right, is Ring Fit Adventure, and that's because the market opportunity it presents is so massive. Despite having just a single title, what a title it's been! Nintendo's most successful new IP of the Switch era, and of course, it did get a little cameo on Alamo. Now, I'm not sure people are going to be queuing around the block for Drago plushes or counting down the days until the Ring Fit movie, but the fitness industry is huge, and we know that Nintendo now has multiple technology teams, as evidenced by the developer interview with the Alamo Group. They've also had a long fascination with fitness technology, even buying a stake in the Pux Corporation to get access to their Fit meter technology. Nintendo's roots are as a toy company, and their current expression of this is as a hardware software company. It seems plausible to me that we could see more ambitious exploitations of this idea, and the Ring Fit characters could potentially be quite a good set of mascots to give the franchise a unified brand, a Nintendo fitness brand. From sports equipment to apps to exercise machines, this is a massive market, and while there are any number of directions that they could go which wouldn't utilize the Ring Fit characters, I could see in the next 5 or 10 years the IP becoming one of their more significant ones, even if it's slightly under the radar of fans whose rapt attention is more on core gaming experiences. Then, of course, there are those pesky level 2 franchises with designs on reaching level 3. Surely, the next 8 years has to be a time enough for them to solve the eternal puzzle that is Star Fox. With the mighty Nintendo software technology having taken a drive of F-Zero to help develop F-Zero 99, I'm optimistic that this series might have a first step towards a revival as well. While Nintendo has moved away from such obvious mascot branded fare in the noughties, both Fox and Falcon do have great potential in Nintendo's IP era. Star Fox especially feels like it should be sitting alongside Pikmin and Animal Crossing, as the merchandising potential of the franchise seems so great, and it's completely possible that Nintendo could try to market it from a different perspective outside gaming. But ultimately, the purpose of most of these endeavors is to guide people back to their hardware software activities, and that's difficult to do if they haven't cracked the Star Fox formula. My guess is that Miyamoto will see it as unfinished business to ensure that a breaking the convention Star Fox title at least sets the course towards a brighter future for the Volpine adventurer before he finally retires from Nintendo. Of course, I would naturally hope that Way Forward return to the fold for another Advance Wars. I know their involvement has been controversial for some, but ultimately, if Nintendo have a relationship built with the development team, that has to be a promising start. If another Code, Mario and Luigi, Rhythm Heaven and more become regular Nintendo staples, then this will flesh out Nintendo's schedule quite satisfactorily. I've already mentioned how ARMS could put its best fists forward, as like Pikmin back in the day, there is clearly a passion for it among a group of developers, and it feels like the kind of franchise that they could nurse on the back burner for a long time, just awaiting the day in the sun. Though this might not be enough to make them secure at level 3, and of course the longer time goes by, the less chances there are of people being able to shepherd the franchises back to good health, and the more chance they end up back at level 1. Just as Grezzo have moved on from working on Zelda to working on ports to potentially being associated with Tomodachi Life, I could see teams like Tantalus being tapped for more and more ambitious projects, and I anticipate that they will continue to seek out new partners for specific series. Wave Race, Pushmo, Fossil Fighters, Nintendogs, and Art Academy feel like potential mainstays waiting for their time to return to the fold. But actually, I rather suspect the big story of the Switch 2 era won't just be level 2 franchises becoming Nintendo mainstays at level 3, but brand new IPs emerging. Nintendo has grown a lot recently, and it's often the younger developers who seem keenest to do new things, with both ARMS and Splatoon coming out of predominantly younger groups. While Nintendo respects the craft of its senior individuals, the first explosion of popularity of games came in the 80s and 90s, when many of the developers were young themselves, and I don't think that's necessarily an accident. There's definitely a developmental push and pull between wise heads and young hotshots. But I think with the Switch concept now being quite well established, Nintendo needs innovation more than ever, and so more big franchises that are relatively small in the scheme of things, but have the potential to be bigger, franchises like ARMS and Ring Fit, could be very welcome. Thank you for sticking with me for this deep dive. Thank you as always to the channel's Patreon supporters. Do let me know your thoughts in the comments, and I shall see you next time for another Nintendo Forecast.